And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Alex Bozich joins me, and we go through several of the stories that we haven't had a chance to get to over the last couple of weeks, starting with recruiting, because this is a big time for recruiting news. Alex recently updated the recruiting board over at InsideTheHall.com. One name shot up the list after Indiana offered him on a recent visit. We also talk about updates with Trayce Jackson-Davis as well as DJ Carton. Alex had a chance to talk with Trayce Jackson-Davis, posted a Q&A on the site, so we get some insight there. And then we answer a few of the questions that you submitted via Twitter, starting with one about Jerome Hunter and his versatility and what that could mean for his ability to get on the floor early. All of that and more on this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink. Hey, real quick, a few words about this week's sponsor, SeatGeek. As you know, buying tickets can be complicated and confusing, but there is a better way to buy with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event. Whether you're searching for a last-minute deal, planning a night out with friends, or need to find the perfect gift, SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There is nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. I certainly recommend that you put it on your phone as well. And it is by far the easiest way that I have found to shop for tickets because I can be anywhere, and with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats. I have used the SeatGeek app here in Dallas, where I live, to buy Mavericks tickets and to go to Rangers games. I've used it for concert tickets, both concerts that I went to and as gifts for my wife. And so you can buy a lot of different tickets for a lot of different live events on SeatGeek. And what's great is that SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. They save you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals. And what's really nice is that every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. Now, the best thing is that listeners of Podcast on the Brink get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. All you have to do is download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code BRINK. BRINK today. That's promo code BRINK for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All right, I am joined this week on Podcast on the Brink by Alex Bozich. And Alex, a lot has happened since the last time that you and I just did one of these with just the two of us, so I figured we'd just hop on here and get caught up on all the latest IU basketball news. What do you say?
Sounds like a great plan to me, Jerod. As you mentioned, a lot to discuss, and seems like there's always something going on in the world of IU basketball. So, looking forward to today's discussion.
So, I was just, right before we hopped on here, as I usually do before we do one of these episodes, I was like, well, let me just check out InsideTheHall.com real quick, make sure I haven't missed any late-breaking news. And there, like a few minutes prior, you just updated your recruiting board, which I had no idea about. So I have it open right here. I haven't even had a chance to look at it yet. Do you want to take me through maybe any of the big changes or kind of the noteworthy things that occurred that spurred you to want to update the recruiting board today?
Well, obviously the news Monday of Brandon Newman from Valparaiso getting a scholarship offer from Indiana to me was notable and kind of maybe in my mind moves him up the priority list. The fact that we had him lower on the board and now that he's visited again and has an offer, I think given that he's an in-state kid and he's been on campus recently, that warrants moving him up. And, obviously DJ Carton is the guy probably on every top of mind for most IU fans right now because he's got a big week coming up. I mean, Wednesday and Thursday, I believe it is, that he'll be at Michigan for an official visit. And then this weekend he comes to Bloomington for an official visit with the IU staff and, their chance to woo him. And the other thing that I tried to do with this update was the top 8 players on the board right now have all either made one unofficial visit to IU or multiple unofficial visits to IU. So we're getting to the point now where obviously things can change in the fall if guys set up official visits that haven't been on campus. But I have a stronger feeling that a kid is seriously considering a school at this point if they've been on campus, and that's kind of one way I'm ordering the board in our most recent update. The guys who have been on campus and have offers occupy the top 8 spots in the board at this time.
So you mentioned DJ Carton, and you're right. I mean, he is a name at the top of everybody's list, certainly, a name very near the top of Indiana's wish list because he is a guard, a lead guard, and there aren't that many of those guys in the Midwest in the class of 2019, and so if you miss out on him, it really feels like it'll be difficult to get, a top 30, top 40 ball handler of his caliber. Obviously, you have guys like Armand Franklin and Brandon Newman who are in-state guys, but they're, a little bit further down the board and maybe not guys that you would expect to come in and play right away day one. DJ Carton might be a guy who could come in and play right away day one. So he is going to have, this visit coming up to Bloomington. What are some things that you would look for, that you would kind of advise people to look for coming out of that visit? Because so many of the stories that we see written after those, it's a lot of the same quotes. It's typically pretty positive. Usually the kids see, the very best of the school and the coaches, and they're happy and the coaches seem pleased. What are some things you would look for in his comments and things that he says that fans might be able to read into to say, okay, this went well, or, maybe we're not as close on him as we hope that we are?
Yeah, the interesting thing here to me is the timing of the visits from both a Michigan and an Indiana perspective. It's not typical that you see a kid use official visits before July. And that says to me that Michigan and Indiana have a feeling that they are close enough or down the line far enough with this kid that they want to get him on campus now and try to end the recruitment before July. And so I would say that, the main thing I'm looking for actually is he going to commit to one of these schools after these 2 visits? If he is, then obviously one of the 2 schools, both schools will know where they stand because one of them will get him and the other one won't, and they can move on. But the other thing I'm looking at is if he doesn't commit to one of these schools and he's going to take this into the fall, if you're Indiana and Michigan, I'm not sure you're feeling great about your chances to land the kid because the longer it goes on, and if he goes into July and says he wants to see who watches him or if any new schools come in and you've already burned your official visit, I'm not sure you're feeling great about where you stand with the kid. And so I'm sure there's some strategy involved with it from the standpoint of, Michigan and IU feel good enough about their chances that, that they wanted to go ahead and get this done. But I don't think you take an official visit from a kid in June unless you feel like there's a pretty strong chance that he's coming down to the wire. So really, I'm going to be on commitment watch for the weeks following his visit. If he's going to take these official visits at this point to those 2 specific schools who we've heard for a long time that he's in really, he really likes both of those schools a lot, then I would just be watching to see kind of in the days and weeks after if he's going to go ahead and pull the trigger and make a commitment, or is he going to wait and see what happens in July and then you get into the fall. And, I don't necessarily think I would feel great if I was either school if he's going to take this into the fall and I've already burned my official visit.
So let me put you on the spot here real quick. So let's say, right now it does look like Indiana and Michigan, might be the leaders for him right now. As you're Archie Miller, as you're the Indiana coaching staff preparing your pitch to DJ Carton and trying to differentiate yourself from Michigan. Obviously Michigan has had more success lately. They just made the national title game. They have a coach in John Beilein that is, everybody respects and has a lot of skins on the wall, more certainly than Archie Miller does yet. He's not in state at either, or he wouldn't be in state at either place as he's from Iowa. Both really good academic schools, both in the Big Ten. So there's a lot of similarities. If you're Indiana, what would you promote to DJ Carton to separate yourself from Michigan and the positives, especially the recent positives that they can obviously lay out there?
Yeah, I don't think it's a situation where you want to go negative at all in terms of going against Michigan or any other school for that matter. I've never been a fan of schools that try to negative recruit. I would say the main thing that you would look to if you're Indiana right now is your recent momentum on the recruiting trail. DJ Carton's pretty close with Trayce Jackson-Davis, so that's potentially a guy that he would want to play with. And you just kind of look, you say this is kind of what our vision is for the program for the future. These are the guys we brought in for this recruiting class. These are the guys we're hoping to bring in next year, and we want you to be a really big part of that, because I don't think you can look a kid in the eye and say, hey, it would be a bad idea to go to Michigan. I mean, Michigan's had great success, obviously, in recent years. They just went to the national championship game. Maybe they recruit a little bit different kind of kid than Indiana has. John Beilein sent, I think, 7 guys to the NBA in recent years and hasn't gotten a McDonald's All-American ever at Michigan. So that speaks to how they can develop players. And so I would keep it pretty simple in terms of, hey, we need a guard, we need a ball handler next year. You've been the guy that we've targeted for quite some time. That we really want you, and this is what we're hoping to do in the future. These are the guys that we're hoping to do it with, and we'd love for you to be a part of it.
You mentioned someone in there, Trayce Jackson-Davis. He is at the top of every IU fan's wish list. He's at the top of pretty much every recruiting board that is out there. The Indiana staff has made it obvious that he is their top priority in this class. You had a chance to do a Q&A with Trayce after he and his Center Grove team were in Bloomington for the camp that they just had there. What did you learn from the Q&A with Trayce, and are you getting the sense that he's any closer to making a quick decision, or is this one going to drag out longer than people had hoped?
I don't know that he's any closer to a decision. I just know that if I was Indiana, I'd be feeling good about the fact that he's saying that he has scheduled his official visit for Hoosier Hysteria. That means that he also said he's going to officially visit UCLA and Michigan State. He didn't have dates for either of those, but he does have a date for Indiana that he's going to come for Hoosier Hysteria. To me, that says Indiana's right there. They're top of mind in his recruitment. Getting him on campus again for team camp like they did last year, all the work that they've done, the fact that he says that Tom Ostrom basically calls him or talks to him every day. I would feel good from an Indiana perspective. With any of these top ranked kids, you can't really, you're not really ever in a position of leverage where you can, try to push a kid to commit, because you don't want to come off the wrong way. You don't want to make a kid feel like they're being forced to commit. But with Trayce, I would feel good. That's why we have him at the top of the board. We have for a long time. I think most people feel like Indiana's the team to beat for him, and nothing that's happened in recent weeks or nothing in his comments over the weekend suggests otherwise. And so this is a recruitment that Indiana is going to be in for the long haul, whether or not he wants to commit now or he wants to wait to the fall. I think Indiana's, in my mind, still right there at the top of his recruitment. The things that he says about Indiana, including the fact that he said specifically that no school has recruited him harder, leads me to believe that Indiana is doing a great job in this recruitment, and we'll just have to see how it all plays out. But I don't necessarily think in this situation that there should be any worry if he doesn't commit before July. The fact that he's already said he's going to come for Hoosier Hysteria and that's going to be his official visit, I think bodes well for Indiana.
I think he wants to stroll across McCracken Court and get a nice long ovation, like all the guys got last year. I wonder if the coaching staff will set that up again for Hoosier Hysteria. I mean,
he was a part of that. He was a part of that, obviously, this past year, but he wasn't as top of mind because he was, an underclassman, and Romeo was there, and Darius Garland, and some of the other guys who had already committed. So I'm sure he's well aware. He's 45 minutes from campus. He has definitely felt the love from Indiana fans. I think on social media, he's got a great relationship with the coaching staff, and I think that's a recruitment that Indiana has to feel really good about at this point.
Hey, we both mentioned the team camp. Can you explain real quick what that team camp is? And is this something that Indiana had done in the past? Like, did Tom Crean do this at all, like his first few years in Bloomington, and Archie revived it, or is this kind of a new idea that Archie brought to Bloomington?
Well, I didn't really cover the team like on a day-to-day basis in the early Crean years, so I can't speak to specifically if he had the team camp. I know it's something that he did not have, or I wasn't aware of in the later years. But basically, most of the top programs in the Midwest, Big Ten schools have a team camp. And what it is, you invite teams to come. I think it's pretty much open. The teams can register to come, high school teams. And Indiana really had a who's of the top high school programs in the state of Indiana on campus this weekend. And you come in and you bring your team and you play games in the facilities. The games were hosted at Assembly Hall and Cook Hall, both gyms at Cook Hall, and then some games were played over at Bloomington South. But there's referees. The games move along really quickly. There's only an hour window, so it's a running clock, and they don't shoot free throws on every foul, things like that. There's some specialized rules to keep the action moving. But basically, it's an opportunity for the high school teams to come in and get some games and play against other great competition, and it's a chance for Indiana to showcase its program by having these teams on campus. And obviously, some of the teams have prospects that Indiana's recruiting, so they can talk to those kids while they're on campus. They can show them around. They can interact with their parents. And so for the teams, the benefit is that they get a chance to obviously get some time together, get some games in the summertime where, you're not always playing with your high school team. Summer is kind of shifted to where it's more focused on the grassroots AAU type team. So this is high school teams getting a chance to play together in June. And for Indiana, it's a chance to get some of your top targets on campus, a chance to meet with their families, talk with them, and also evaluate them in a competitive setting. So it's really a win-win for both parties. And I think it's one thing that a lot of people scratch their head about later in the Tom Crean era that Indiana didn't have this. And I think it really speaks volumes to how well Indiana is connected with high school programs around the state. You just kind of run down the list of some of the schools that they had for the event. It was a really impressive list.
Any other recruiting news that we should hit before we move on to some other topics? Anything else?
No,
pertinent?
nothing pertinent. Obviously the big news of the week was the Newman offer that we talked about a little bit earlier, and then the Carton visit coming up this weekend. And then things will heat back up, obviously, in July, where guys will start, I think, cutting down their lists a little bit more after July, setting up visits, and then we should get an even clearer picture of where things are headed for 2019.
All right, well, we need to pay a couple of bills real quick. So some of you will hear a couple of ads here coming up. It's just kind of based on the geolocation. That's how this ad system works that we're using. So some of you will hear a few ads coming up. Others of you will hear us jump right into the next topic. That starts right now. All right, so let's cover a few other topics here, Alex. And I know you put out a tweet for some questions, and some people sent in a few good questions, so we'll go over those. Matt, really I thought had the most important question of the day. He asked, will the Cubs win another game this season? The answer to that is obviously no, and it's going to be very enjoyable to watch for White Sox fans like you and me. Did you want to add any insight to Matt's question?
Cubs fans complaining right now about the lack of wins. I mean, the White Sox are probably, depending on the day, I guess you could argue the Orioles or the White Sox are the worst team in the American League right now. So to Cubs fans, I'm sure your slump will end soon. Just always remember, it could be a lot worse. You could be the worst or the second worst team in the American League, like the White Sox are right now. So better to have a losing streak in late June than when it really counts in September or October. So yes. I'm sure things will get back to normal soon enough.
Well said. Okay, so this is from Agent Zero on Twitter. He says, I recently read that Jerome Hunter has been working out with the guards. Also read Romeo and company are extremely high on his potential. Do you see Jerome Hunter possibly playing some guard? He would obviously be a big matchup nightmare with his size, especially posting smaller guards. What do you think about that? That's the interesting thing about these freshmen, and we've talked about this on the assembly call a few times, and it's like this with any freshman. You see these guys play, you watch film of them, you try to project how they're going to be, but it's so hard when you haven't actually seen them. It's so much easier to project what Juwan Morgan will be as a senior, or, what Al Durham might be like as a sophomore, because we saw him as a freshman. And, a guy like Jerome Hunter especially has so much talent, but it's difficult to project how he'll be able to do just right from the get-go in terms of production, because Justin Smith is a guy who was rated in a similar place to Jerome, not as high. Jerome was, between 40 and 60, depending on where you look, and Justin was lower than that. But even Justin, the first few months of the season, really inconsistent, really up and down, kind of took him a while to find his niche. And, do you kind of think that'll be how it is for Jerome, or do you think he's a little bit more ready to hit the ground running and be a consistent contributor in the rotation?
Well, if he can play guard, he's going to be a huge matchup problem because of his size and his ability to shoot. I think his ball handling obviously is going to have to get better. He's not a bad ball handler. He's just, at that size, it's easy, if you get a smaller, quicker guy on you to get the ball taken away. So you have to really tighten up your handle if you're going to have the ball in your hands at that size. But I think long term, his potential at the NBA level is probably as a 2-3. So why not go ahead and get him some reps there? At that spot, if he can handle it, and also you look at this year's roster, it feels like maybe the opportunity for him to get on the court could be in that role, because and I'm sure we'll have more conversations about this as the offseason goes along. But I look down the list at this roster, and there's 14 guys in my mind who have a chance to count Zach McRoberts, and then 13 scholarship players. 14 guys competing for 8 or 9 spots, 10 maybe at the most to play. Mm-hmm. And so where do the minutes come from? And maybe he is a guy that can play multiple positions, play some guard, and play some also maybe in a pinch, play some 3, play some 4. I mean, and in a system, in some systems, he would be like the perfect 4 guy. But I think his versatility is going to allow him to move around and play different positions. And so I would not be surprised if he played guard next season. I don't know how many minutes or what kind of role to expect out of him next year, just because there's so many unknowns on this roster and how they're going to play and how they're going to utilize different guys. But I think it makes some sense to develop him there and get his ball handling better, and then have him be able to kind of do a variety of things when he's on the court.
You mentioned the 14 guys, and look, those are 14 guys. You're obviously including Zach McRoberts in there, so the 13 scholarship guys plus him, who all they've either played before, because they were here last year and they played some minutes before, or they're freshmen that are highly touted that you would expect to be able to come in and play right away. As you just kind of look at it, who are the guys that in your, this initial, the middle of the offseason impression that you think right now are going to be on the outside looking in when it comes to playing time? And that can obviously change. There's a lot that goes into it, but just your impressions right now. And do you get any sense that there's a chance anyone could redshirt?
I don't know on the red shirt. And I also, since I haven't seen workouts and I haven't actually, seen these guys playing together, it's hard for me to say, but just kind of looking at it from a logical perspective and kind of looking at the team next year, I would say guys who I feel pretty good about playing a significant role. Obviously, Romeo Langford, Juwan Morgan, Devontae Green. Trying to think who else. Those are obviously the 3 that kind of pop in my head immediately.
Smith.
Beyond Justin Smith as well. I think he's going to have a chance to play a lot. Evans Fitzner, I think, he's obviously did not come to Bloomington to sit on the bench, and he's a guy who's got a lot of experience. But you look at guys like Deron Davis, Al Durham, Race Thompson, Demezy Anderson, Jake Forrester. Are these guys going to be regulars in the rotation? Who knows? Zach McRoberts is another one. Is he going to, I think a lot of people are just assuming that he's going to come off the bench. Do you think he's just going to voluntarily say, I'm just going to go back to being walk-on Zach McRoberts that barely plays? I don't think so.
I don't think his coach believes that.
Right. Exactly. So, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a fight for minutes. I think that's a great thing, because last year, a lot of times there was moments where they were searching for answers, searching for a guy to put in. Like, can we get by for 2 minutes with Juwan on the bench? Can we get by for 2 minutes with Rob on the bench? I don't necessarily think it's going to have that same feeling this season. But beyond those, those top 4, I think that I mentioned earlier, you kind of helped me with the Justin Smith. But Smith, Morgan, Green, and Langford to me feel like the guys who you can kind of have a really good feeling they're going to play significant roles. And beyond that, it's I think who performs the best in practice practice and games leading up to the start of the season. And I think we'll see roles change and maybe diminish and grow as the season goes along. And I think it's going to make for a fascinating watch in terms of game-to-game minutes, how guys are maybe coming in and out of the lineup. But I just think the talent on this roster from top to bottom is just significantly upgraded from a season ago, bringing in basically, I think, 7 new players if you count Evan Fitzner and Race Thompson.
Yeah, the thing that's becoming clear to me as this offseason progresses and you look at the roster and you start projecting forward is you look at the last 2 seasons, the 2 seasons prior to this, which were both very disappointing. And both of those teams had a lot of question marks, and a lot of question marks came up as the season went along. And the big problem that we realized is that the answers to the questions weren't even on the roster. And that's why, we had such a hard time and why hope became hard to come by and the team struggled. You look at this year and, and I've had several people ask me, don't you think Indiana's being underrated, being somewhere around, between 25th and 30 in a lot of people's, preseason rankings. And I look at it and it's like, well, there's a lot of question marks on this roster still. Obviously, you feel good about Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan and having that two-headed monster at the top. And it certainly feels like Justin Smith is a guy who can take a next step and be solid. And you're hoping that Devontae Green can. But even those last 2, those are question marks. And even Romeo Langford to a certain extent, just because we haven't seen him at the college level, so we don't know, just how great he'll be. So the reason why I think it's fair for Indiana to be in that 25 to 30 range is there are still a lot of question marks on this roster. But the difference between this year and the last 2 is it actually feels like while there are a lot of question marks, the answers are actually on the roster. We don't know how it will shake out yet, but we feel a lot better about, say what we can have as a big man rotation. We just don't know who exactly it will be. We feel better about our scoring in the backcourt, with Romeo and guys like Devontae. And I think maybe the one big question that we have that we're not sure if the answer is on the roster is point guard. But even there, a lot of us feel good about Robert Finney as a guy for the future. We just don't know if he'll be ready right away or if Devontae will be ready right away. But to me, the big difference is there are a lot of question marks, and that's why I think it's still fair for people to be conservative with their preseason rankings of where Indiana is. But it feels so much better because it feels like the answers are actually on the roster, and that's what's going to be exciting to see shake out. Because, like you said, there's 14 players, 14 solid players. Who ends up playing? Like, there's going to be some good players not playing, but when you're a top program or a top 30 program, that's probably how it should be, that you have that level of competition inside your roster.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to what I've talked about a little bit before with the previous regime and kind of how you build a consistent winner in college basketball. You don't always rely on guys coming in and make an instant impact. You have to develop guys over a course of time. Not every player that you have come in is going to be a Cody Zeller or a Romeo Langford in terms of their impact. And so you want to have guys who can come in and buy in. Maybe they don't play as much earlier in their careers, but by the time they're, a junior or senior, they're either a starter or they're a rotation player. And then, you kind of keep the cycle moving. Not every player that you bring in is going to be an NBA guy, but you sprinkle a couple of those in with 3 or 4 year guys who, do the right things in terms of working hard every day in practice. They're good students off the court. They're good people. They're good teammates. And that's how you build a program that's built for long-term success. Only a few programs, Duke and Kentucky, Kansas maybe to an extent, can consistently win every year, recruiting one and dones. And even you look at Kansas, what they did or have done, they've taken a lot of guys who maybe were a little bit undervalued, Frank Mason, Devontae Graham. They've turned them into 4-year players who have really developed over the course of time in their programs, and they've won big. Villanova, the same thing. They've gotten their fair share of highly ranked, McDonald's All-American type kids, but they've also developed their fair share of guys who maybe redshirted a year or didn't play as much early in their career, and they've developed them so that by the time they're juniors and seniors, they're ready to play major roles. And so you hope that, if Indiana only plays 9 or 10 guys this year, the guys who maybe didn't get as many minutes kind of look at at what has happened at some of those other programs, and they say, hey, maybe Romeo is going to get, the 32 minutes a game this year at shooting guard, and I'm not going to get to play as much, but I'm going to learn from him as much as I can. I'm going to work hard in practice, and then next year, when it's my turn, I'm going to be ready to take on a bigger role. And that's kind of that's your hope. I mean, I think previously you had too many instances where guys transferred out and maybe weren't the right fit. And I think the one thing that really feels different right now with how the kids Archie Miller's bringing in is you can kind of see why he took it. He has taken every commit that he's got. They kind of make sense for a variety of reasons where they fit in, or you can kind of project their potential long term, whereas that wasn't always the case previously.
We got this question from Mike, and I don't know the answer to this. I'll be curious if you do. He wondered if there's any updates on the success or failure of the NIT rule changes and whether any of those will get adopted and when. And just as a refresher, last year's NIT featured a number of different kind of rule modifications. They were testing it out. They moved the 3-point line back 1 foot 8 inches. The free throw lane was widened. Most notably, I think the game was divided into 4 10-minute quarters as opposed to 2 20-minute halves, with then teams shooting 2 free throws beginning with the 5th foul of each quarter, and then the shot clock resetting to 20 seconds after an offensive rebound instead of the full 30 seconds. I didn't watch a whole lot of the NIT. Did you watch any of that? And do you have any thoughts on how those rule changes kind of were, what they did to, just kind of the pace of play and the style of play? And have you heard anything about whether those might be instituted full time?
I have not, but I also haven't looked into it. I saw that question as well. Maybe that's something we can look into and maybe follow up on a future episode. But, the main thing that I would still like to see college basketball move towards is the 4-quarter setup. I mean, every other, women's basketball, the NBA, high school basketball, they all play 4 quarters. I still don't. FIBA, international basketball. I mean, college basketball to me is the only thing men's college basketball is the only game I can think of that plays the 20-minute halves. And when you kind of look at how some of the games drag on with the bonus, I just wonder, is it a better idea long term for the game to go to a 4-quarter setup? And I believe the NIT did that last year. So that's one thing I would really like to see strong consideration of for the future. But speaking specifically to last year's NIT and whether or not any of those changes are going to be enacted for next season, I can't speak specifically to that.
Yeah. All righty. Anything else on your mind, Alex, here as we wrap up this episode talking IU basketball? I know, the other kind of big things that have jumped out to me this offseason, and we've talked about this a few times on the assembly call too, is just the way that Indiana is using social media, which I continue to be impressed by. I've really liked, and listening to this, if you are not following the official Indiana men's basketball Twitter account at Indiana MBB, and maybe they post these on Snapchat too. I'm not on Snapchat, so I don't know. But if you're not posting them, it's really a good way to get some insight into what's happening, get little sneak peeks of workouts that are going on. They've put some cool pictures up of a lot of the freshmen with Cliff Marshall getting workouts in. But what I've really loved are the practice videos or individual player videos. I know there was one for Devontae Green. There was one for Zach McRoberts, where they're basically splicing live game action with that same movement in practice. So it'll be like Zach McRoberts cutting down the lane, catching a pass and laying it in. And you'll see him doing it in practice and in a game, with the message of, what happens in a game, it happens first in practice, and the importance of practice. And I love that subtle message. And plus the video editing is really good, and they splice in Don Fisher's calls. So I just continue to be impressed with what they're doing. Certainly from a fan perspective, just the little insights that you get, these little nuggets that kind of keep you going through the off season, whet your appetite as if we really need it, but to get more excited for the season. But even more so than that, what it does from a recruiting perspective. And, I think, recruits being able to see what's going on social media and visualize themselves as Indiana basketball players, because there's more things out there to visualize yourself as a part of. And I think that makes a big difference. It might not make a difference if you or I were being recruited by Archie Miller right now, but it probably makes a difference for people like Trayce Jackson-Davis and other guys, who grew up just with social media as the world that they know. That has been one of the most interesting developments to me this offseason. I thought they did a good job with it last year, but it really looks like they're starting to hit their stride with it. And I think that'll only pay big dividends in the future if they continue with that strategy.
Yeah, Archie Miller, not long after he got hired, kind of mentioned, I think Ohio State football is maybe like a blueprint for what they wanted to do with IU basketball in terms of their social media presence, becoming more cutting edge and kind of up with the times with their social media presence. And I think they've done a great job, as you mentioned there. I mean, I've even done posts on the site in recent weeks where I just kind of do a collection of everything that they've put out there, because I realize that not everybody's on Twitter, or not everybody's on Instagram, not everybody's on Facebook, and some people that read our site don't go to those sites. But I think the content's excellent. A lot of times it's short and sweet and to the point, but it does give you maybe just a better feel for how things are going, what the kind of things they're working on. And the other thing I really liked was the video with Jerome Davis, where he kind of took you through a day in the life and showed you different things. I hope they continue to do things like that. I think that was another thing where previously I feel like you didn't really get to know the players at all on a personal level. I don't think fans necessarily felt a connection with guys. They didn't really feel like they knew much about them beyond basketball. And with the Jerome Davis video, it was kind of, you're riding alongside with him for a day. You kind of get a feel of what he's doing every day as a student. You get to see some of the people who are in his life on a day-to-day basis as an IU basketball player. So I thought that was great as well. So overall, just an outstanding job on social media. Obviously makes our jobs a little bit easier because people are asking us what's going on in the off season. We can kind of point to some of these videos. Hey, this is what's going on. This is what I would check out. And I think it's a win-win for the program in terms of just giving themselves positive information and also giving the fans what they want, which is content 365 days out of the year.
Is that thunder in the background?
It is. It's oh
man,
it's pretty intense right now. A storm has rolled in, and I was actually hoping that my internet didn't cut off here mid recording, but it seems like we've reached the near the conclusion here, Jerod. So I think we're going to come out from the thunder and the lightning all right on the other side.
That's funny. You could kind of hear this faint sound, and I'm sure the audience will have noticed this. I thought it was like your microphone just kind of moving a little bit, or like your arm hitting the microphone. I didn't want to say anything because it wasn't too bothersome, but then I saw your message and realized it was probably thunder. So that's what that noise has been in the background.
Yeah, no, maybe people thought it was IU getting a commitment or something. So no, it's just
oh man, if only. Well, hopefully one will come soon. Indiana's certainly in a good position with some top flight guys, and now and that's really what you hope to see next. I think the benefit, and this is the last thing that we can talk about before we get out of here. Why would it be important to get early commitments? I mean, look, just so that you want to get commitments from top players anytime you can, but say Indiana's able to get a commitment from a DJ Carton, and then, a relatively early commitment from a guy like Trayce Jackson-Davis at Hoosier Hysteria or shortly thereafter. Now, you put two of those 5-star guys, a big man and a ball handler, in your back pocket. It really gives you some flexibility and some focus time to really go after the guys that you want to target after that going down the stretch. Rather than you don't have any commitments yet and you're having to scramble a little bit more. So if that can happen for Indiana, obviously you would really have to like where they would stand to get another top 5, top 10 class for 2019, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of look at it from the perspective of, and this is kind of best case scenario, if they were somehow able to get a couple commitments before July, you can narrow the focus, right? Say, for example, they were able to get DJ Carton or Trayce Jackson-Davis, one of those guys, or even both of them. Then they can really kind of narrow the list of guys that they're looking, and kind of you can really shoot for the stars, so to speak. I mean, if you got Trayce already committed and you got DJ Carton, maybe you go out and try to get a shooter as well. And you try to get Keon Brooks or one of the other forwards that's on your list. But yeah, you'd be feeling really good about your position. Now, that's not to say if they don't get a commitment going into July that they're not in great shape. I still think that they are. But I think as a college coach, if you can wrap up those kind of kids before July, and then really have July to kind of focus on the guys you really want to round out the class, and then also start to look ahead to 2020, 2021 and beyond. I think that's the ideal situation. So we'll see how it lines up. as I said, I'm really looking to see what happens with Carton after these visits. Is he going to go ahead and make a decision? Is he going to commit to Indiana or Michigan, or is he going to take it into the fall? Which, if that happens, I'm not necessarily sure that I feel great if I'm Indiana or Michigan about my chances to get him.
All right, Alex. Well, thank you for your flexibility on recording times today. I always appreciate that. And just
Absolutely.
for being here and lending your insight. And we'll be back next week. We will have a guest working on a few names for next week and for the future. So we'll be back next week with another brand new episode, a new guest to give us insight. And we appreciate you joining us for this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We will be back next week with a new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.